family.
Yeah.
So also I'm so passionate about the theme that you and your wife chose for your recent book, and I'd love to just to get a bit of background maybe about why you guys decided to write that. I am totally see that the ecosystem has been developed by men, and unfortunately is very workaholic and not relationship focused. And I know that that's one of the themes in your book. So would you talk a little
Sure.
bit about that?
So the book, I like to say subtitles tell you what a business book is going to be about. So the book is called Startup Life, and the subtitle is Surviving and Thriving in a Relationship with an Entrepreneur. And my wife, Amy Batchelor, and I wrote it together. So it's not a book about us. It's a book about the sort of struggles, opportunities, journey, and the dynamics of having a relationship with an entrepreneur. Much of our own story is in the book, but we have contributions from about 20 other entrepreneurial couples, including a number of couples where the entrepreneur is female versus male, and in some cases where both of the partners in the relationship are entrepreneurs. So we worked hard to get a good, diverse view of the dynamics of an entrepreneurial relationship. And in it, we're trying not to be either prescriptive, in other words, if you do these things, you'll be happy. We're also trying not to create what we called a YARB, which is yet another relationship book. There's tens of thousands of those available on Amazon.
Yeah.
We tried to really get inside the unique challenges that partners have in a relationship when one of them or both of them are entrepreneurs. And these challenges are challenges that don't just occur early in the relationship, but occur throughout the relationship. So Amy and I have been together for 22 years, and we still have struggles with different types of things, and we're continually learning how to be better partners in the context of a very intense entrepreneurial life. Interestingly, many of the things that we talk about in the book I think are generally applicable to any good relationship or any partners that are trying to develop a great relationship over time. But I think as more and more people focus on entrepreneurship and have to take responsibility for their own success, many of the challenges and pressures that we face throughout our relationship and that many entrepreneurs face and that couples face in the context of it will come to bear. So we've tried to be very thoughtful about giving lots of examples, yes, but letting people have the ability to make the book their own in the context of their own relationship.
And would there be a particular piece of advice that came out of that for you? I mean, obviously you've got the overview because you looked at all the different relationships.
I'll give a couple. I'll give sort of generic and then a few specific. A generic one, and we're unapologetic throughout the book, is the notion of the importance of communication. And not just communicating, which a lot of, it's sort of simple, oh, you should communicate with each other. That's nice, but that doesn't mean anything. Actually understanding how your partner communicates and interprets information and reacts to information is very important. And so early on in our relationship, and there's lots of different ways to figure that out. I mean, personality tests, and we like to talk about the Cosmo quiz as a fun metaphor, like do things together as a couple to learn about each other early. There's two spectrums that are very challenging, I think, for most partners in an entrepreneurial context, and that's the introvert extrovert spectrum, and it's the intrinsic extrinsic spectrum. Wow. So introvert extrovert, a lot of people don't actually know the difference. The simple difference between an introvert and an extrovert is an extrovert gets energy from being in group settings with lots and lots of people and lots of stuff going on. An introvert, that drains the introvert of energy. Many people are introverts who experience life as extroverts. I'm a good example of that. I'm very much an introvert, but I spend an enormous amount of time in extrovert settings. Yes. They drain me of energy, so I need time to recharge my batteries in an introvert setting, which could involve time with Amy. The intrinsic, extrinsic spectrum is another example. Extrinsically motivated people are people who get excited about an award or public recognition, or when somebody says, hey, that's really good, congratulations, that's extrinsic. And intrinsic motivation is you're motivated by something internal to yourself. I turn out to be very intrinsically motivated by learning. So when I'm not learning, it's very hard for me to stay motivated about what I'm doing. And so when you combine these two vectors, and these are just two of many we talk about, it's very easy to misinterpret your partner's public persona as an entrepreneur with what they need in the context of a relationship. And the entrepreneur often misinterprets his or her partner's behavior and what they need in the relationship. And we get very tactical. One tactical example would be, it used to be, I'll give two. It used to be when I came in from the end of the day, I come in through the door and I'd be greeted by Amy, who spent her day with our dogs. And the dogs are great companions, but they don't really carry on a very good conversation. And so I'd walk through the door and she'd be ready to have a conversation. I'd walk through the door and I just need to be quiet for a little while. That was fine when we figured that out, but it wasn't okay for me to walk through the door and go to my computer, because that didn't give her a sense of any sort of connection. And so what we do now when I walk through the door is we say hello, we hug for 10 seconds, and then we talk about what's going to happen next. In the evening. Hey, I'm really tired tonight. I just want to lay on the couch and watch TV, or can we have dinner together, or I need to work for an hour, or I have a phone call that I need to do. There's that conversation. It's not a negotiation. It's a conversation about what's going to happen next. Because once she knows what the plan is, whatever the plan is, she's fine. It's the not knowing the plan was the disconnect.
That's fabulous.
Okay? That's an example. Yeah. Another example, I'll give on the sort of opposite end of the spectrum, is mornings. I wake up very slowly, although I get up typically very early. But I need quiet for about 90 minutes. This is, again, part of being an introvert. I just need quiet. I need to sit in front of my computer and write or answer emails or whatever. I just need my own sort of start. Yeah. Amy wakes up, and before she's out of bed, she's talking. Right? She's got words coming out of her mouth that are in her head before she even gets out of bed. For a long time, I would wake up before her, and I'd have an hour and a half of time. I'd wake up at 5, she'd get up at 6:30 or so. And when she'd wake up at 6:30, she'd come downstairs where I am to my office, where I'd usually be in front of my computer. And there is nothing, I've learned that there's nothing more soul-crushing than having your beloved, when you walk down the stairs, greet you like this. Right? It's not that I can't hear her coming down the stairs, right? And so now I hear her rattling around upstairs. So now when I hear her waking up and rattling around with the dogs, I immediately stop what I'm doing. I go up, and we do what's called 4 minutes in the morning. So I spend 4 minutes with her, just whatever. She's got words in her head. I've had my hour and a half of quiet time. We make a cup of coffee together.
That's so cute. That's
and it's just 4 minutes, and sometimes it's 15 minutes, and sometimes it's 3 minutes, because I might have something I really want to do.
Yeah.
But it's that moment, that touch point as a couple, that again, if I'm describing these both as examples of communication,
Yes.
right? We've learned what we need in that interaction.
Yes.
And the last point I'll make on this is for the entrepreneur. This is the challenge for the entrepreneur in the partnership. Entrepreneur in the partnership is used to being the person that all the stuff is around, and is the person who gets to define how the communication patterns work, and is the person who's used to having their stuff be the most important.
Yes.
And I learned pretty early on that my stuff was much less important than Amy's stuff in the context of understanding it. And the behavior that I was showing when I'd say to her, Amy, you're the most important person in my life. Oh, hang on a second, I got to take a phone call. Right? That didn't work.
No,
right? My behavior was not matching up my words.
Yeah.
And so when I changed my behavior, all of a sudden, the dynamics in terms of our own communication got much, much richer. So I like to try to tell in the entrepreneurial couple that the entrepreneur needs to put the energy into understanding how to wire those pathways with his or her partner. The partner's responsible for it too, but the entrepreneur has to put some extra energy into it, because the entrepreneur is typically not used to having to think about it, because he or she gets to dictate it to everybody else.
In my words, it's a great method of syncing.
Yep.
Because what's on one computer and on the other, you're
That's right.
basically matching each other.
That's right. It's a good metaphor.
Really, really good information for me and everyone else. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what's happening in the venture capital industry. Obviously, part of the big changes that are happening have resulted from the Jobs Act, and I know that you were a great supporter of that whole process. And I'm wondering what can happen in the venture capital industry, because always with change is opportunity,
Sure.
correct?
Yeah, always there's opportunity in the context of change. I think that the dynamics around venture capital are pretty independent of the Jobs Act. And interestingly, in the context of venture capital, my instinct is the biggest impact of the Jobs Act will be the confidential filing period for companies going public. IPOs have been, very, very challenging for many technology companies for a number of years for a variety of reasons. But one of them is the actual process of going from a private company to a public company and the filing dynamics. And the Jobs Act introduced a confidential filing process where you can actually go through the whole SEC process while keeping the information private until you're ready to actually go public. And so it gives companies a lot more effective way to navigate the going public process, especially in situations where they're relatively young companies and they don't want to expose for 6 or 9 or 12 months as they're in this preparatory phase a whole bunch of information to their competitors through the public filings when they're still a private company. I think broader than that, though, the phenomena that's occurred is really the democratization of innovation and the democratization of entrepreneurship. And what I mean by this is that over the last number of years, maybe the last decade or so, the amount of capital that you need to raise to make progress is decreasing. Progress as an entrepreneur. The amount of information available about how to create a company and about entrepreneurship, the opportunities for immersive entrepreneurial experiences that are educational as well as functional, like accelerators like Techstars or programs like Startup Weekend. The amount of visibility and understanding for entrepreneurs to have about the funding process, whether it's blogs or the book that my partner Jason Mendelson and I wrote called Venture Deals, or just the ability to read what's happening and understand it more deeply. The networking dynamics about getting both exposure and visibility to what individuals are doing. Things like AngelList that allow companies that are raising early stage money to actually really engage in a much broader network, and for investors who want to invest in as angel investors in early stage, to give them mechanisms. All of these things are happening at this incredibly rapid pace. Some of them have more impact than others in different places. The geographic disbursement of it is pretty phenomenal. Like the fact that you no longer have to physically be somewhere to get this information because of this magical thing called the web. But also the funding dynamics as they get dispersed around the world. You start to have lots and lots of entrepreneurial ecosystems and startup communities that have much more depth of understanding of how to develop and grow over time because of this democratization of innovation. The other thing I think that is so critically important is, while the venture capital industry and venture capital firms play, an important role in the innovation economy, it's easy for entrepreneurs to forget that the vast majority of companies don't raise venture capital. And I actually say it's easy for venture capitalists to forget that the vast majority of companies that are built don't raise venture capital. And so this notion of more and more and more people being entrepreneurs, whether or not they raise venture capital, being able to fund their companies through various mechanisms, whether they're angel investment or bootstrapping and customer funding, or whether it's crowdsourcing, when crowdsourcing starts to become sort of fundamentally legal and well-defined in terms of the rules. All of these things are good long-term for the dynamics of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think the venture capital industry has to adapt aggressively to that, where the dynamics around it are now much more broadly distributed. And in that, I think there's enormous opportunities for venture capital investors who continue to be creative and thoughtful about how they invest and how they work with entrepreneurs and how they integrate with the different startup communities around the world.
So it really is all about that creativity and innovative.
Yeah, I think I like to say in the Startup Communities book that I wrote early on, I talked about the difference between hierarchies and networks, and this belief that we fundamentally now shifted from a society that was dominated by hierarchies to a society that is more weighted towards networks. It doesn't mean that hierarchies go away. We've had hierarchies, from the beginning of time. But the network now dominates in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and how entrepreneurship spreads. And if you think about a startup community in any city, it's fundamentally this messy network versus this top-down thing like government or university. And venture capitalists have to be nodes on that network. And venture capital firms can try to have some hierarchy and can try to have some institutionalization, but fundamentally they're investing in things that are part of this very, very messy substrate that is a network. And as that network becomes more and more dominant in the way that our society creates new things, I think that the opportunity for innovation entrepreneurs will continue to accelerate.
And I remember someone saying a few years back that being a VC is like at an entrepreneur gathering, it's like being the hot girl at the party. So in a way, that's going to level out a bit.
Yeah, I never felt that, so that's that's fun. But I would say it's kind of almost the opposite. I think the entrepreneurs are so much more important than the VCs in that context. And what's happening is, it's not that all VCs are equal. You have this, you have some amazing VCs and you have some terrible VCs, and you've got a bunch of VCs sort of in the middle. And same is true of firms, just like anything else in life, that you have, different people are going to be great at different things as well. So somebody who might be a terrible VC for one thing might be great at something else. The entrepreneur's need for the great and rare and elusive VC is still high, but the entrepreneur, or the value, I should say, not the need, the value that entrepreneurs can get out of that is still high, but the need for that to be a successful entrepreneur is much, much less.
Yes.
And so the VCs have to be super successful long term, have to recognize that fundamentally they are at the service of the entrepreneur. And frankly, the best entrepreneurs are ones who are servant leaders at the service of their employees and their team and their constituents, their customers. That mindset, I think, is one that's so important versus this top-down, I'm the boss, I'm the VC, the cliche, he who has the gold makes the rules, is the golden rule. That's dumb. And that's not a particularly effective model in the context of this kind of continued distribution and democratization, really, of entrepreneurship and innovation.
That's a fabulous, inspiring model. Thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
I'll leave it with that, and thanks again for your time today.
Totally.
Thanks, Brad.
All right, great.